Hey everyone, Alex Kaiju Fans coming at you guys with another video. Today I just wanted to talk about my honest opinions in regards to the writing in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Now, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is a film that is generally seen by most of the fan base to be very convoluted with the time travel plot, to the point where I'm pretty sure many fans have had to consistently re-watch the Wikizilla time travel explanation video just to fully grasp the concept that the film was trying to convey. Some people can say that this was the catalyst for the Heisei Godzilla series, having a lot of beam fights, as they're referred to, where monsters, because they're so bulky or slow, will just simply spam colorful lasers at each other. Or the movie has lackluster special effects that some may say haven't aged well. But for me at least, I would say that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah definitely has some very interesting writing that really takes it further than what the movie simply is. And at the base level, the surface level at least, contextually, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is just a movie where people from the future come to the year of 1992, Japan, and they use the Dorats to get irradiated to mutate into King Ghidorah, and that's their big plan to destroy Japan. But I'd say that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah definitely has a lot more deeper implications. And let's just start with that reason why. So, if you take a look to the actual plot of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, as I said before, people from the future come to the year 1992 and they have a plan to destroy it. But you have to ask yourself, what is, of course, the motivation for why these people from the future want to destroy Japan? And we don't find out later until halfway to the point of the movie where the big twist is revealed that in the 23rd century, the year 2204, the year that the Futurians come from, Japan has become an economic powerhouse that has been able to consistently buy out other continents, including South America and Africa, to the point where the Earth Union isn't able to control Japan. But you had to ask yourself, would this have happened if the Futurians had not gone back in time? Because obviously the course of events was already set within motion. But they're trying to change that course to become different. So you had to ask yourself, why is this necessarily relevant? And why tell this kind of story? Well, the reason that I interpreted was the fact that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is a metaphor for the great historical struggles between Japan and the rest of the Western world. Now, many years ago, Japan was an isolationist nation. It had closed itself off from most of the world. The only way in which Japan was able to become adaptable to the rest of the Western world was because of the fact that the United States of America arrived in Japan and forced them to open their borders and to trade with other nations. But because of this allowed Japan to industrialize, which allowed it to militarize and become a really advanced Eastern nation. To the point where Japan was able to fight against another Western power, the Russian Empire, in the Russo-Japanese War at the turn of the 20th century. Now, you may ask yourself, would Japan have become a power if it wasn't for the United States intervening? And the answer to that question is generally a resounding no. Because of the fact that Japan hadn't been isolationist after America had forced it to no longer become this isolated nation and instead to industrialize like the rest of the world, this set in path the motion for Japan to become a contender on the global stage. So then you must ask yourself, in the context of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, if the Futurians never traveled back in time to prevent Japan from becoming a world power, did they too not just set in motion the course of events that would allow Japan to become the very power that they were trying to prevent all along? And the answer to that, just like in history, is a resounding yes. Because only through foreign intervention was Japan able to become this successful. You also have to understand the relevance that the Second World War plays in this movie. The Futurians realized the significance of Godzilla, and the fact that Godzilla is a huge contender that can definitely put a major dent within the Futurian plans. In an ironic twist of events, we are introduced to this character known as Mr. Shindo. One of the other characters in the film says that Mr. Shindo was saved by a dinosaur in Lagos Island in 1944, and ironically saved the Japanese economy. In this sense, it's almost as if Toho Studios, when writing this movie, was in fact self-aware of what they were doing, given the context of Godzilla and Mr. Shindo. The reason for this is because Japan was a country that was devastated after the Second World War. Anyone can talk about the atomic bombings, but on top of that you have the numerous fire bombs that were launched on Japanese cities all across Tokyo, which was one of the main reasons why Tokyo, the capital of Japan, wasn't nuked in the first place. But on top of that, the damage that Japan had sustained in the Second World War was very immense. Only in 1954, with the release of the original Godzilla, did Japan's economy actually manage to recover somewhat. And this of course led to other Japanese pop culture icons, such as Gamera, Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Sentai. But it was only because of Godzilla that these other Japanese tokusatsu franchises were able to come out. So then you must ponder, if Japan was never affected by the atomic bomb, would Godzilla have ever existed? And the answer to that is a resounding no. Most likely Godzilla wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the atomic bomb being so fresh within the memories of Japanese citizens less than a decade after the movie actually came out. Because in this sense, it is all because of certain key pinnacle events that happened for a reason that set in course the motion of certain outcomes. And this is generally why Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah has some of the most brilliant writing in the Godzilla franchise, because it shows the relevance of minuscule details that can truly go a long way. The Second World War actually makes a relevant appearance in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, to the point where they even make an Easter egg reference to Steven Spielberg, or at least his dad. But if you look to Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in the Second World War, it takes place in 1945 during the 1944 in the Marshall Islands campaign, headed by American Admiral Chester Nimitz. Now, at this point, Japan was losing the Second World War. The Navy and the Army, the Imperial remnants, were mostly incapacitated after the Battle of Midway, a huge blow to the Japanese Empire. But it was on these tiny islands all across the Pacific that Japan was literally fighting for their lives. And this was a most crucial campaign, because if Japan lost this campaign, which they did, it would put American bombers within range of Tokyo, where they could firebomb the capital. So in this instance, the Futurians want to get rid of Godzilla. So they go to Lagos Island, where they find the Godzillasaurus. And in a controversial way, the Japanese are portrayed as very heroic, determined, with vigor and courage, who are fighting against the immeasurable opponent, the United States Army. And in this hopeless battle to the death, the Japanese get saved by the Godzillasaurus, only for the superior American firepower to wipe out that dinosaur. But in this sense, Godzilla has been discovered. And so what the Futurians do is that they replace Godzilla with three Dorats, wherein they later become King Ghidorah, the three-headed dragon, and they get transported to 1992, where they could wreak havoc on modern-day Japan. This once again shows the instance where minuscule changes to certain events can result in varying outcomes, just as they would in the real world. King Ghidorah gets transported into 1992 and wreaks havoc in Japan. The Futurians, led by Wilson as well as Gran Chico, believe that they have won. And if you take a look to the characters of Wilson and Gran Chico, you have to understand the relevance, and these two characters are Anglo-American type characters. They're both American style characters. And I believe that definitely portrays relevance within the movie, because usually the villains in Godzilla movies are Japanese people. If you look to the Exilians in Invasion of the Astro Monster, Japanese people. Destroy All Monsters, the Keylok, Japanese people. The Nebula M Space Hunter aliens, Japanese people. The Third Planet of the Black Hole aliens, Japanese people. But in this specific movie, we have two American characters who are the villains of the movie. And I think that this portrays a theme that has been reoccurring in Godzilla, and that is of Japanese independence. After the Second World War, America really came to occupy Japan. And even though America doesn't occupy Japan anymore, there are still certain restrictions that are placed on Japan. For example, on the island of Okinawa, there's an American military base there. And for several years, the Okinawans have been protesting that the base be removed. On top of this, the Japanese aren't really allowed to have a full-fledged army, but instead a defense force. So, in this instance, Japan feels as if they should be independent. And this isn't a theme that is particularly unique to this movie. It's a theme that we are able to see in Shin Godzilla. But I'd say that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah was definitely the first movie where it portrayed this theme of Japanese independence. For so long, America had been kind of controlling Japan to an extent. And Japan felt that they could make decisions on their own. That same aspect was portrayed in Shin Godzilla, where the Japanese government was trying to handle the situation. And they ultimately took care of Shin Godzilla, whereas the Americans, when they sent their B-2 stealth bombers, were shot out of the sky by Shin Godzilla. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, on the other hand, takes it a step further by having the Americans as pseudo-villains, in a sense. Pseudo-Americans as the villains. Chuck Wilson and Gran Chico are, of course, American-type characters. And they're trying to prevent Japan from becoming this global superpower. Because you have to put yourself in the mindset of when this movie came out. During the course of the 80s and the 90s, there was a big potential rivalry between the United States of America as well as Japan. And because the two were trying to compete economically on the world forum, Japan had actually made one of the speediest recoveries in the world. Japan went from being a war-torn nation that was devastated with thousands upon thousands of not just soldiers but innocent civilians lost in the dreadful stages of the war, as well as being hit with 2 atomic bombs. But if you compare that to Japan in the 80s and the 90s, Japan managed to become this bustling economic center and one of the most advanced countries in technology and medicine. So in this sense, the United States had seen that their hegemony was being limited by Japan, and thus saw them as an economic competitor on the global stage, which correlates with Wilson seeing that Japan in the future becomes technologically, economically, and internationally more renowned than any other country in the world, to the point where they could just simply buy up continents. And it's almost as if Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah was definitely ahead of its time, because as of today, Japan is definitely a contender on the world stage. It's one of the top 5 largest economies in the world. This year was supposed to be the Olympics being hosted in Japan. And on top of that, Japan has recently established their Space Force, The Prime Minister, currently Shinzo Abe, has tried to sort of move around restrictions set in place by the Constitution and remilitarize the self-defense force to be a little bit better equipped. But also, if you compare this, you can see that Emi Kano, the Japanese national who comes from the future, makes reference to the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union no longer are competitors. And this makes sense because when the movie came out in 1991, the Soviet Union would later go on to collapse that very year in December. But going back to Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah definitely shows this relevance between the West versus the East. And Japan comes out on top in this sense. The Futurians are seen to be generally incompetent. And the reason for this is because they moved Godzilla from Lagos Island into the Pacific thinking that they had gotten rid of Godzilla. By placing Godzilla in the Pacific and showing that the Godzillasaurus as well as the original Godzilla were two different monsters, it showed the lack of foresight, the neglect of clairvoyance. Because now, Godzilla still returns in 1984, he still fights Biollante, showing that when the Japanese go to the Bering Strait to revive Godzilla, Godzilla's already there after his battle from Biollante, recovering from the bacteria that was given to him. And so in this instance, Godzilla becomes even stronger. The battle between Godzilla and the three-headed dragon King Ghidorah is truly colossal and titanic. Some of the best that the Heisei series has to offer, in my opinion, from the Godzilla franchise, which Godzilla is able to kill not only the Futurians but also King Ghidorah on top of that. Mr. Shindo hoped that by bringing Godzilla back to life, as he thought, it would actually allow the same Godzillasaurus, the same dinosaur that saved his garrison, to now save the very country that he worked so hard to rebuild after the Second World War. But in an ironic twist of fate, Godzilla ends up destroying the very country that he thought he was going to save because he worked so hard to rebuild it. And even Mr. Shindo points out this situational irony that occurs within the movie, to the point where even Godzilla kills Mr. Shindo in his own building. Emi decides to go to the year of 2204 to bring Mecha King Ghidorah into 1992, which he is able to do successfully. Mecha King Ghidorah does battle with Godzilla and manages to trap him along with the Mecha King Ghidorah itself at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. However, the Futurians' very thing that they were trying to prevent ends up coming to fruition at the end of this movie, as well as the rest of the Godzilla franchise, and that is the halt of any Japanese expansion, which happens at a gradual rate, of course, because the rest of the Heisei series takes place in the 90s, but we can see by bringing Mecha King Ghidorah into 1992, it allows the Japanese government to gain access to really advanced technology that no other country has access to. By taking the remnant of the carcass of Mecha King Ghidorah, they are able to construct many more machines such as Mechagodzilla 2 and Moguera, improve their special armed forces by making the Super X3 in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, and overall Japan comes out on top as an extremely powerful nation at the end of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah for a potentially brighter future and a fighting chance against the upcoming threats that pose a great significant danger to the Japanese home island. Overall, I think that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is really overlooked by the fan base. I personally really enjoy this movie. I think that it has some of the best thematic writing within the entire series, and definitely established some themes that would go on to inspire later Godzilla movies such as Shin Godzilla, in my opinion. Overall, what did you guys think of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah? This was the only time that Godzilla and King Ghidorah could fight each other one-on-one. Usually the two monsters are surrounded by their allies or their opposing factions, but this time it was just Godzilla and King Ghidorah fighting by themselves. I ultimately thought this movie was pretty well executed. I know the time travel plot can be really confusing to the point where you probably don't even just have to watch Wikizilla, but you also have to watch D-Man and other YouTubers. But yeah, anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys next video. Bye.